It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. We have a friend from Pakistan, Zakaria Kaleem, who says, while I understand that most traditional Chinese martial arts aren't at all practical for actual fighting, we could talk about that in a bit, but let's go on with the question. Do you think that they should be preserved as a form of cultural art and heritage? Okay, let's assume for a minute that when we say traditional Chinese martial arts, we're talking about essentially wushu forms, right? We're talking about taolu. Doing the dance, spinning the swords around, the decorative forms from people who don't know how to fight, but they want to preserve a cultural tradition. Great, that's awesome. Cultural heritage, I'm all for it. It's beautiful. There are a lot of great, beautiful cultural artifacts from the old world that I am very happy still exist in the world today. And martial arts forms, awesome. I'm all for it. For example, in my own Pakistan, there's a form of traditional grappling called, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this, malakra, practiced by the people of the, and I'm probably going to mispronounce these people's name, the Sindh, and it's an odd style. You can look it up yourself. It looks rather strange in practice. And like traditional Chinese martial arts, it's not at all practical in real life, but the government still considers it a form of cultural heritage and makes an effort to preserve it. Okay, great. Which also leads to never be modernized, rather to be purposefully stuck in a bubble for the sake of preservation of what is considered something equivalent of a national clothing or an ethnic group. What are your thoughts on this, and do you think the Chinese government should do something similar with traditional Chinese martial arts like that? What do I think of that? Well, as long as people understand the difference, this is a cultural artifact that we are preserving for national tradition to look at, essentially a live performance that you might see in a museum, if that was even a thing. As long as people understand what it is and what it isn't, great. Awesome, I'm all for it. Now, if these things are being taught as practical self-defense or something like that, doing a fancy dance with a sword or a stick or something like that, then no, that's not okay. That's not helpful. That's dishonest. The Chinese government has done a bunch of different things over the years. Take, for example, back in the days of Chairman Mao, Mao himself was an admirer of martial arts, of Chinese martial arts, in spite of the fact that a lot of the actions he took actually harmed the development of Chinese martial arts in the People's Republic for quite some time. But, it's a whole thing, man. It's a paradox, but the development of the Chinese Wushu Federation, when did this start? I think it started back in the I don't even remember, decades ago. But the objective, the principal objective when the Chinese Wushu Federation started was to preserve certain kung fu forms. When I say kung fu, gung fu, there are many, many different styles of Chinese martial arts. There are over 400 different indigenous styles of Chinese traditional martial arts. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people throw the word kung fu around like it's one style. For anybody who needs to know, it's not. Gung fu simply means great skill. When people say Chinese kung fu, zhongguo gong fu, what they generally mean, the great skill of the Chinese people is their martial arts, or at least was their martial arts. Today, it's largely performance. Sport wushu, for example, if you go to a Chinese sport university, you can get a degree in wushu with an emphasis in either taolu, the forms, or sanda, free fighting, actually putting on boxing gloves and doing Chinese kickboxing with throws and takedowns, or shuaijiao, wrestling. So, yeah. But, for the most part, in this modern world, when people, at least people in the West, say kung fu doesn't work, what they're talking about is wushu forms. Learning a wushu form doesn't teach you how to fight. Now, you can dissect and study that cultural artifact of the taolu, of the wushu form, and glean little bits and pieces that can help you if you already have the context of experience of fighting. If you are a veteran fighter, and you looked at that ancient Pakistani martial art that you were talking about, you could probably glean aspects like, oh wait, this means this, and I can actually incorporate that into my game, and that is a very unique and interesting way to teach. Like, man, right before this lockdown here in Shanghai, I had this revelation about the X block in karate and taekwondo forms, and how it was often taught as you block an X kick by raising your hands like this, and I learned wrist locks, dude. It's a flippin' wrist lock, man. And it's not just a wrist lock, it's a wrist lock that I've been using. The high block that is taught in taekwondo and karate forms worldwide as stop somebody from clubbing you over the head with a hammer fist. Nah, man. Guess what you can do with that? You can wrist lock people with that. It's kind of interesting. Oh man, I had these light bulb moments fairly recently about that. The other blocks, the low block and the middle block and the knife hands inside and outside, I've figured all kinds of fascinating bunkai for those, which are very practical, and I use them and I teach them, but the high block and the X block were always a mystery to me. But I figured them out, and they're actually really great moves, and I'm really excited about teaching these things. But if I didn't have the context of experience of practical fighting, I wouldn't have been able to decipher any of that. It would have been a mystery forever and ever. Amen. And if I had only studied the forms and nothing else, it would have just been an exercise to work up a sweat. And nothing else, literally nothing else. It would have been a visit to the neighborhood of make-believe in my mind, imagining blocking an overhand strike from overhead. Then what the heck is this? Pulling the arm down and the elbow back, palm facing up. For there's a practical application for every single movement of both arms in each one of these movements, of every kata, of every taolu, of every form. Yeah, man. Yeah. And there's a tiny fraction of humans on the planet who understand any of this. Because most people don't seek the answers, because most people do not invest heavily in both the traditional forms and in the practical fighting. Most people don't. Generally, it's one or the other. Or they dabble in one and go full speed in the other. But I love the fact that we have these artifacts from the past in the form of forms. Sometimes it's just because they're fun to look at or think about. And once in a while we can have full-on revolutions that can change the way we approach combat. And every once in a while we can find something that's really useful, and sometimes it's like, actually it's not that useful, and that's not how I fight, not how the people I fight. And so I'm going to disregard this part next. But yeah, man, I'm going to look up that martial art. What was it called? Malakra, maybe. Correct me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but I'm going to look it up. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, and thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.